You're listening to the Cinemental Podcast.
Shall we begin?
Welcome back to the Cinemental Podcast, where we discuss mental health themes from cinema, television, and sometimes even popular culture. I'm Jeffrey Jones, and I'm a filmmaker and professor, and I'm joined, as always, by my brother, Dr. Joshua Jones, who, as well as being a person who would be useless if lost in space, is a general and forensic psychiatrist. You would not be useless, Josh, if there were Martians and they needed some mental health. Then you would be the most useful person to be lost in space.
How can you say I would be useless if lost in space? That's not even remotely true.
Because the only person who apparently is useful is a botanist, and you don't have any botany skills.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we want you to start your week off right with our podcast. So we drop a new episode every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, or you can watch our hottest and spiciest clips and full episodes on the YouTubes. All right, Josh, today we're talking about The Martian. We're doing this because, one, it's an incredible movie, but also Andy Weir, who is the writer of The Martian, had a movie come out this week called Project Hail Mary. I have read both books. I thought they were wonderful. But yeah, I thought that this would be a good week to talk about The Martian and all the mental health themes that are very prevalent within.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved The Martian. I loved the Martian book. I, too, have read the Wikipedia synopsis of Operation Hail Mary.
Project Hail Mary.
Well, this is, the Wikipedia
whatever.
Synopsis got it as Operation Hail Mary.
Yes.
Yes.
All
I feel comfortable talking authoritatively about both of those.
I love it. All right, so after being stranded on Mars, astronaut Mark Watney uses science, ingenuity, and sheer willpower to survive while signaling Earth that he is still alive. Back home, NASA and his crew race against time to bring him back before his resources run out. Josh, what are the topics of the day? What are we going to talk about?
Well, Jeff, we're going to talk about survival and resiliency, and specifically some of the characteristics that Mark Watney shows that helped him in this situation, and that NASA specifically looks for and augments.
I'm so excited to talk about that. Yeah. I'm happy you know a lot about NASA.
I do.
I know. I'm happy you know a lot. I'm excited to learn.
Sorry. I was so defensive there. It's so difficult to tell when you're being a sarcastic dick or just your regular dick.
I was being neither in this case.
Okay. We're going to talk about the command decision to leave somebody behind and the psychological impact of that on the person making the decision, the person left behind, and also the people who are following the commander who has to make that decision. Yeah.
And spoiler alert, we're going to argue about that one, which I'm excited to get into.
Well, we're also going to argue about transparency in decision-making as a leader. And I'm going to argue that radical transparency is almost always best.
Josh, we do have a sponsor this week, which I'm excited about. Today's episode is brought to you by Me-Ces. Mm-hmm. The only at-home fertilizer system powered entirely by you. It's not your feces, it's your Me-Ces. That's right. Why waste perfectly usable resources when you can turn yesterday's meals into tomorrow's survival strategy? Me-Ces, from you to your food, inspired and sold by Mark Watney.
Yeah, that's great. I use Me-Ces all the time and actually have for the last 40 years. And it's just great. Everything tastes about the same.
Yeah.
And I have been chronically and seriously ill for 40 years. So.
There you go. Okay. For those who didn't watch it, The Martian follows astronaut Mark Watney, who is presumed dead and left behind on Mars after a violent storm forces his crew to abort their mission. Injured but alive, Watney quickly realizes he has no way to communicate with Earth and only limited supplies. Using his skills as a botanist and engineer, why not? It's like a Steven Seagal movie. He begins solving one life-threatening problem at a time, growing food in Martian soil, creating water, extending his oxygen supply, all while documenting his situation with humor and determination. Back on Earth, NASA discovers Watney is alive and launches a desperate, high-stakes effort to bring him home, while his crewmates make the risky decision to turn their ship around and attempt a rescue. As plans collide and time runs out, Watney must undertake a dangerous journey across Mars to reach a launch site, pushing his ingenuity and endurance to the limit. The story builds to a tense, collaborative rescue that underscores both human resilience and the need to develop your Iron Man type powers. Josh, I love this movie. I remember watching this movie, and I didn't see it in the theaters. I saw it on home video, and just watched it again. Just immediately watched it again. I thought this was a phenomenal film. Josh, let's dive in. I want to talk about Mark Watney. We're going to talk about him a lot. Can you give him a diagnosis, or do we just talk about what happens to the guy? Right?
He does have a diagnosis. So in DSM-5, he would qualify as a stud disorder. He is just a stud.
Okay. All right. Well, one of the key points of the movie is his use of humor. And you might think that that's a writer trying to make the movie interesting, but you're going to argue that that's not true, that that's a crucial component to his survival, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. Mark has a mix of gallows humor and some self-deprecation that is really, really healthy in situations like this. Gallows humor or dark humor, or pointing out the funny bits of something that is, very serious, like a death or impending destruction, is a very healthy coping mechanism for a couple of reasons. One, humor is good. Laughing is amazing for your mind, for your mental health. Two, it helps to point out and deconstruct what we humans sometimes look as an all-encompassing existential threat in everything. It points out that this
say that again.
Gallows humor, this dark humor, points out the fallacy or the falseness that everything is an existential threat.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
It breaks it down to bite-sized pieces, which is really important. We're going to talk about this later. But it breaks down and says, okay, this really isn't all that bad. Folks, my brother has a really great way of asking me if my day is really as bad as it is when I get things going. And he asks me, Josh, did you wake up with a dog's dick in your mouth? And if you didn't,
we need some context.
It's really
for that.
not all that bad. No, I'm going to get to the context.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you didn't, then it's really not all that bad. And that's the kind of level setting, the kind of reframing that gallows humor does, and that you see Mark Watney do over and over again. And he does it in a way where he's like, well, shit, I'm going to have to science the shit out of this. I mean, that's funny. And it's also pointing out you got to take these in bite-sized pieces. Jeff and I have gotten a lot of weird looks throughout our life because we make fun of death and cancer constantly. So both our parents died of cancer when we were in our 20s. Were you even 20 yet when Dad died?
No, I was 19.
I can't remember. Yeah, so they died of cancer. Jeff and I long say that we Jones Brothers, we put the fun in funeral.
That's right. Yeah.
Because we joke about death a lot.
Yeah, it wasn't even us who said that. It was the priest. He was like, I want to hang out here with you guys because you guys are having a good time. Everybody out there is sad. Like, well, we put the fun in funeral.
We put the fun in funeral.
Yeah. No, I think, I don't know why. I mean, I guess just, us dealing with cancer for our entire childhood is probably what, put me in line with loving gallows humor. Even today, when something terrible happens, I immediately think of the joke. And I'm sure that's a coping mechanism within me. But yeah, I immediately go to the gallows humor. And I have to really watch myself with who I'm talking to and whether gallows humor is, whether they're ready for that, or not. But I always have that joke ready and primed as soon as they're ready. Okay, so the dog's dick in your mouth thing, it came from, that's not original to me. I think it was a UCB sketch. It wasn't. There's no way it was an SNL, but that didn't come from me. That's a sketch. It's very funny. You can look it up online. But it makes a good point. If you're having a bad day, did you wake up with a dog's dick in your mouth? No, you didn't. It's not that bad.
It's not that bad.
So yeah, I loved the humor in this. I thought it was great. Here's an odd question that's not necessarily about mental health. Watney the Botanist. He was one of the best in the world at botany, and he was an astronaut. stuff like that kind of bothers me in movies where can people really be an expert to that level at two different things? Do you buy that? Because I don't.
This is a 100% believable. And if you read about how NASA is preparing to send people back to the moon or to Mars, they are picking people who are experts in these fields, in botany, in astrophysics, in astrobiology, in all these things. So this is 100% believable. It's not a stretch at all. That's who they send up now. Astronauts who they send up to the International Space Station, they send up scientists. They train them to be astronauts. You can't do it, in very quick fashion. They go through years of training. It's not like you can take a bunch of miners and train them to be astronauts in 7 days and send them up to destroy an asteroid.
Okay. I'm going to defend Armageddon here, though, for a second. Those guys broke down. They did what normal humans would do, and they broke down. So it's not like they were like Mark Watney. They were very different than Mark Watney. Steve Buscemi couldn't handle it. A lot of those guys absolutely couldn't handle being in space. So, it's fairly realistic that they did break down and weren't great astronauts. I will defend Armageddon to my dying day.
I was saying that. My point is that Armageddon is probably the most realistic astronaut movie ever made. But back to The Martian, which is a close second.
But let's cover Armageddon. Let's do it. The problem is, Josh, I think we're just of that generation now where a lot of people haven't seen those movies that, we loved growing up. We have to cover Point Break, though, at some point. That's just it's my favorite movie of all time. We have to cover Point Break.
No, we need to cover Armageddon for sure. I mean, I don't know about you, but I want to cover Armageddon because I just don't want to miss a thing.
Oh, was that an Aerosmith reference?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay. We'll move on.
That's gonna get cut.
No, absolutely. Anytime you fall in it, I'm keeping it. This is an interesting thing that I think about a lot. Is astronauts, by their very nature, are doing something incredibly dangerous, right? How long does the training take, or what is the training like to get someone to a point where they can do the job like you and I do our normal job? Does it ever become just a normal thing for astronauts, or is there always a heightened sense of risk? Or because you've done it enough, you just get used to it? What is the adaptation like versus the preparation?
Yeah, great question. And when you read about this from either NASA manuals or astronauts who've done it, it is a mixture of both. They want to train somebody to the point where doing the tasks that you need to do to stay alive in space are routine. You can almost do them without thinking.
Right.
But you also want to have some level of idea of the gravity of the situation. Mm-hmm. And I think, Mark Watney pointed this out in many different ways and many different times in the movie where he said that, you need to just do things step by step. You need to go back to the training. You need to go back to the manual. But you also need to remember, and this was a really great point that he pointed out at the very end of the movie when he's teaching astronauts in their first day, you need to remember that space is absolutely unforgiving. You will die out there. You can die out there. And having that sense that's there without letting it be overwhelming is a reality that you have to deal with. So to go back to the answer to your question, Jeff, how do you train for this? You train for it over and over and over and over again. Astronauts don't get to go up without years of training, unless they're like a special situation.
Do you know the specific psychological training that they go through?
Yeah, I know some of it. When we talk about Jessica Chastain's command decision to leave Watney behind, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the death sims that they do. But in terms of picking and training the teams, they're looking for astronauts who are, quote, low drama, high competence individuals. Okay. So these are folks who are really good at their jobs, really good at their task, but don't let a lot of things faze them. And this is a particular personality type. They prioritize astronauts who are good neighbors, people who are easygoing, have high social skills, and are emotionally resilient. So Watney's lack of neuroticism or anxiety, nervousness, is a key personality trait. And it's likely why he was chosen for this mission, the first manned mission to Mars in this universe,
Right.
and why he didn't succumb to a psychiatric break in this situation.
Yeah, it's funny. There's we talked about gallows humor and just humor earlier. I mean, I will tell you as a leader, and I'm sure that you've led teams as well. I don't mind humor, but you have to be inherently aware of when it's time to shut it off.
Yeah.
And it's time to okay, I need you all to pay attention. We don't have time for the jokes right now. Right now it's time to get serious. It's like when the thing starts to tip, nobody's making jokes anymore. Now it's like, okay, let's
buckle down.
Let's use our training. Let's buckle down. Let's figure that out. And there is a difference, and there are times where I'm like, have to tell team members. I mean, nobody's at risk of dying, on any teams that I've ever had. But I'm like, dude, there's a time and a place,
Yeah.
But I've had that time and a place conversation with many of my assistants. Blah blah.
Yeah. Well, so NASA picks these people based on these factors, and then they go and they train them in a set of expeditionary skills to maintain team and individual health. And there's 5 key ones that they really hammer into them. One is communication. They really harp on active listening. Not just what you're saying, but what everybody else is saying.
Right.
2 is leadership and followership.
Yeah,
Knowing
sure.
when to lead and when to support.
Yep.
3rd, self-care, team care, monitoring your own fatigue and monitoring that of your teammates.
Yep.
4th, conflict management, addressing small issues before they become space madness.
Right.
And 5th, group living, maintaining hygiene and social norms in very tense and closed-off situations.
Oh, it's so funny. I just heard from, I just saw an interview with Mark Kelly, and he was talking about how absolutely rank the space station is. And it's just a mix of BO, and he's like, it is nasty because there's just no way to, prevent all the body odor and whatnot that happens when you're in an enclosed environment. But it's like when you open those doors and you enter that space, it is rank. And I'm sure that's a big part of it. There's no escaping that ship. You can't get out. You have to live with those people, and you have to resolve those conflicts. And little conflicts blow up into big conflicts if not dealt with. And I certainly got the sense that this crew, loved each other and whatnot. And obviously they don't have any issue going back for Mark Watney.
No, they didn't. I mean, in reality, space travel in our world is incredibly expensive. It's incredibly dangerous, and there is no space in your space capsule that is wasted space. There's no place for you to get away. There's no quiet room. There's no little corner where you can go and be private. You mentioned what Mark Kelly said about the International Space Station just being rank, and stress is felt throughout the body. It's felt in the brain. But the number 2 place where we have neurotransmitter receptors in the body is the gut. And so I think we all know that when you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling distressed, your gut feels it. So you can train all you want, but the stress of going into space, I wonder how the astronauts' guts change. And then with the food that they're fed up there, I bet there's just some nasty space farts. Just
also
awful.
nasty space poop, which is what helped Mark Watney live. I'm sure that was some real nice fertilizer. Let's talk. I want to talk about this for a second, Josh. Shift focus to the crew. So they lose a friend. They don't know that Mark Watney survives. They think that they have lost a friend, and it's 3 years back to Earth. And like we said, you cannot get off of the spaceship. You were in, wartime scenarios. I mean, you were in a war. What do you do with a person who is experiencing some manner of PTSD in that sort of situation where you can't get them the help that they probably need?
Yeah, really good question. And I think in this situation, if anybody on that capsule, if anybody on the Hermes flying back to Earth was having PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, they were certainly all having guilt. And it may not have risen to the level of an actual disorder, but they were certainly all having guilt. And they were all grieving their lost comrade.
Right.
Even before we talk about treatment for PTSD, you got to talk about what do you do with grief there. And what they would do in this situation is that they would have a lot of talking about it. There's things to do on the way back to Earth. I'm sure they had lots of experiments to do, all that kind of stuff.
Was there a psychiatrist, or was there any mental health professional on the crew?
There was not. Yeah,
I think that's probably a mistake. I think that's probably not what they would do in that case, right? They would have someone who's specifically there as a counselor.
Well, so again, NASA and other countries and now other companies are preparing for manned missions to Mars.
Right.
So they're thinking readily about this. Could you send a psychiatrist there? You could. Could you send a psychologist? You could. But you want the people who are going to go up there to have, as we talked about, specializations. Mark was a botanist, but you want them to have, you want them to have minors. Like if you're thinking about college and your major is botany, you want to have minors in other things that you can do well enough.
Well, right? And you talked about it earlier where it was like the skill of taking care of yourself, but also taking care of other people. So they're probably all a little bit trained in helping someone out psychologically.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. They would be trained in mental health first aid. They would be trained in disaster mental health. They would at least have access to this. And more than just that, in a situation like this, and the Hermes coming back, and Mark Watney actually said this, they would have access to the world's experts in this.
Right.
Right. So they would be able to say, okay, let's do this. Even though there'd be a communication delay, they could still have some sessions with trained psychologists, trained psychiatrists. They would be constantly checking in on the well-being of the team. They'd be doing this anyways. Hey, let's go through your psychological profile, how you're feeling, that kind of stuff. They would really want to be checking in on them to see, do we need to spend some extra time? Do we need to alter your daily schedule so that you have some more downtime, etc.
Yeah.
But more than anything, they would be telling folks to talk about it while also maintaining your mission status and making sure that you are doing the things in your daily schedule to get through this. In some ways, it would be a little bit easier to do the evidence-based things that we know that you should do when you're dealing with grief or even PTSD in a very regimented place like the Hermes capsule. We know that, if you're suffering from any kind of mental condition, a strict schedule with strict sleeping patterns, strict eating patterns, a strict schedule is very helpful. That's going to be built in up there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's probably also really helpful to be around other people who are badasses.
Sometimes, if that is used as a positive thing and not as a way to isolate the person or feel isolated, well, these people are all handling it, I'm going to stay silent and keep it inside. That would be a negative. Being able to talk to the other folks and say, hey, how are you handling this? I'm not doing so great, which they led us to believe was the culture in that spacecraft would be a healthy thing.
Yeah. I think a lot about the documentary Meru. I think you watched it as well, but they're trying to climb this mountain, and at some point, one of the guys just stops talking, and they're trying to think about do we, he's obviously having a mental breakdown. Do we go down or not? And they decide to push forward, and eventually he starts talking again. But he has just kind of a full on mental breakdown. I'm like, guys, come down the mountain, help your buddy out. It's not worth it, guys. All right, let's get off the ship for a second. Let's talk about Jeff Daniels, because his character to me is one of the most fascinating, because I think that his is the most thematically interesting, because he's the one that has to make the hard choices, about whether to save Mark Watney or not. In some regards, Mark Watney does not change in this movie. He's just faced with such an immense task that it's just put one foot in front of the other. And that's sort of the theme, is rather than tackle the impossible, just tackle one thing at a time, and you can achieve the impossible. It's an amazing theme. But Jeff Bridges is the one, or Jeff Daniels. Jeff Daniels is the one who, has to really think about everybody's well-being, and has to weigh what is the cost or what is the value of one life. And he, in a way, is the only person, in my opinion, making rational decisions in this movie, trying to leave Mark Watney behind. And everybody else keeps kind of screwing him over because everybody else wants to save him. But let's talk about, being in the position where you've got to make the hard choices, and compartmentalization, and let's talk about Jeff. I know you've got some thoughts.
Well, I do want to talk about Jeff. I want to talk about Jeff Jones and his ridiculous idea that Jeff Daniels is the put upon hero of this movie.
No, he's not the put upon hero. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about
Okay.
Every story has a character who changes. He is one of the ones that I think changes. Mark Watney doesn't really change. Mark Watney's obviously the hero of this, but everybody is the hero of their own journey. And we watch Jeff Bridges as sort of like the second main character in this. Mark's making decisions.
We also watched Jeff Daniels do it too.
Do I keep saying Jeff Bridges?
You do, and it's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I make that mistake all the time.
Yeah. But so I'm not. Jeff Daniels is the hero of his own story, and he's, in my opinion, the second main character of this. You could make a movie just about Jeff Daniels, and it would be a fascinating movie. I mean, they essentially do. They're telling two movies at once.
Sure.
But let's talk about the hard choices. How do you value one life versus putting other people in harm's way?
Yeah. So they face in this movie a classical ethical dilemma of information asymmetry.
Okay.
Jeff Daniels,
I don't know what that means.
Well, Jeff Daniels and the team on Earth has some information that the team on the Hermes doesn't have.
Right.
And they have to decide what to do with it. And they choose for a time to withhold the information that Mark Watney is alive so that they can make decisions for the crew.
Right.
And I'm going to tell you that level of lack of transparency in a command decision can get you very short-term value for a lot of long-term detriment. Okay. So we call this actually the trust tax versus the trust dividend.
Okay.
By withholding the information from that crew, Jeff Daniels thinks that he's doing a good thing because I'm going to save them. We're not going to risk 5 lives to get this one, blah, blah, blah. Right. But what he's doing is he is betraying their trust when they eventually do find out.
Okay.
And that trust is hard-earned and easily lost.
Sure.
And that team never trusts Earth again.
Okay. My response to you for that, Josh, who cares? It's Jeff's job to bring them home. That's it. It's his job to bring them home. And he's going to make the decision that he thinks is best for them to bring them home and not give them a piece of information that they can't do anything about that could possibly wreck them. And I think that that's the right decision. You get them on the ground. We've already lost one person. You're also dealing not with the trust of just the astronauts. You're dealing with the world's perception of space, of space missions. And so losing one astronaut is bad. Losing everybody is worse. And so for him, the decision is get them on the ground. And I don't necessarily think that in the big picture, that's a bad decision. And if you lose their trust or not, okay, great. We've got other astronauts who are going to go up after this. And I don't think that those astronauts are going to not go because it's like, he made a command decision. I think that if you want to go to space, you want to go to space. So I don't. If I was in that situation, I don't know that I would hold that against him. I would understand. I would get like, yeah, you've got to compartmentalize some of these decisions, and his decision was to bring them home, and that's his decision to make.
Yep, you're right. He withheld that decision, and all 5 of them landed and left Mark Watney behind. Oh, wait, but that's not what happened in this movie, and that's not what ends up happening in real-life situations.
I know. They disobey an order. It leads to them disobeying an order.
That's exactly right. That's
so you
exactly
think
right.
think disobeying the order was the right thing to do?
No, I think that the culture in which they decided to disobey the order and end up going back for Mark with the slingshot maneuver was partly, if not mostly, because their trust was betrayed when they didn't tell them about Mark before. Look.
You are absolutely crazy if you think that if they had told them,
Jeff, you are totally wrong.
Hold on. Let me finish my point.
After being in so many different command or leadership positions, I can tell you this is 100% the way it goes.
I'm saying if you think that them getting the information right after they got back on the Hermes was somehow going to lead to them not making the decision to slingshot around the moon, they were always going to make that decision no matter when they got that information. Always.
Maybe.
They were always going to go back for Mark Watney.
Maybe.
Well, it was in the script.
Here's where this really comes into play, especially for isolated missions like this trust tax. Okay. NASA has observed a phenomenon in isolated crews called psychological closing.
Okay.
And this already happens even before you consider whether there's been a rupture in trust. This is where the crew stops sharing their true feelings or problems with mission control, viewing them as outsiders or even opponents. To counter this, NASA usually allows astronauts high autonomy, giving them control over their own daily schedules, and they found that when astronauts have this kind of agency, their stress levels drop. Okay,
I buy that. I totally buy that. Yeah.
But this phenomenon of psychological closing is observed in all groups when there's a command and control structure, when there's any hierarchical structure. You see this in companies. You see this in the military. But when this trust level drops, that psychological closing slams shut.
Right.
And the leadership is viewed as opponents.
Yeah, look, I see this as a director all the time. I'm dealing with a lot of artists when I'm directing. Artists have a point of view. They have things that they want to do. A cinematographer is better than I am at crafting an image. And so not listening to the way that he wants to craft an image is just dumb. And they shut down. And they're like, fine, if you're not going to, hire me to do the job that I want to do, then I'm not going to, work as hard. I'm just going to give you exactly what you want. But if you say like, hey, come to me with some cool shots, like you've got a lot of autonomy over how this is shot, man, the art just explodes. It explodes. And you can do the same thing with set designers. You do the same thing with actors. Judd Apatow. I don't think it's Judd Apatow. Maybe it's Judd Apatow. No, it's Adam McKay. Adam McKay is kind of famous for saying, somebody paid a lot of money for this script, so we're going to give them the script. But after we get the script in the can, we can have some fun. And so all the actors know, okay, say the words that I was given, but I'm also going to have a chance to bring my own thing to it. And that level of like autonomy, or that level of, always leads to a much better product.
Exactly. And my point here, Jeff, thank you for making my point for me, is that if they gave them the information about Mark Watney, they're up there. They're going to be thinking about this. They're probably going to come up with some other solutions that may not endanger him or the mission or themselves as much if they had treated them as partners as opposed to automatons.
Can we talk quickly, though, Josh, about the absolute ridiculousness of it taking Donald Glover to come up with the slingshot maneuver, as if every single person hasn't seen Star Trek 4?
Well, not only hasn't everybody seen Star Trek 4, but I
Or
actually read
one
that
of
this
the
is one of
Apollo
the,
missions.
this is the this was like the absolute number one scientific criticism of this movie.
Yeah.
Is that this is the first thing everybody would have thought of.
Right.
Yeah. So look, I'm glad Don Glover got to do this and got to be in this movie and got to be the hero in this. But agree with you, they would have absolutely figured this out.
There's a famous saying: there are no small parts, only small actors. There are small parts. You know, they didn't have to give Donald Glover the scene where he like figures it out and then like plays with Jeff Daniels' pocket and all this stuff. They gave him stuff to do with his small role. And I think that that's one of the signs of a really good filmmaker is when it's like, hey, read this small part. Oh, hey, there's a lot to do with this small part.
Yeah.
You know, and Donald Glover, for being one of the, like, I think smallest of the main parts, you know, has like one or two scenes and he just crushes it because he has something to crush. You know, and everybody in this movie had something great to do, you know, even if it's a small part.
I also appreciate that scene because they called it Operation Elrond, and nobody knew what Elrond meant except for Sean Bean, who was at the conference of Elrond in Lord of the Rings, which is great. By the way, you said Jeff Daniels again. Did you mean Jeff Bridges?
No, I meant Jeff Daniels, Josh.
Oh, okay. You sure?
You jerk! That is not a nice thing to do, Josh. We've talked a little bit about PTSD, and you have said something before where, like, when you're in a wartime scenario, you're not feeling the PTSD like you do when you come home because you're still in it. And I've always thought that was a very interesting thing. And obviously, Mark Watney is on Mars for a long time, but man, there is one scene where I'm like, that would have broke me. And it's the scene where it's after the midpoint of the movie, something goes wrong, he loses his crops, and he has to duct tape the wall with plastic, and then there's a storm, and he just is constantly listening to the plastic, like, expand and contract. Man, I don't think I could have come back from that. I think that scene alone would have absolutely broken me.
Even the most resilient people, we think, have breaking points, or at least not. I mean, breaking point sounds so final, and it's not like that for a lot of people who are resilient. There are a lot of little points, little breaking points, little times when you're like, "Oh man, I'm crushed here." The resiliency is to be crushed and to come back from it.
Right.
And not have it be so final.
Right.
And this is one of the things, Jeff, where you and I may not be very good astronauts. You and I are both you and I have a tendency and have throughout our life to be very, like, you know, final thinkers. Like, oh, well, this is the end.
Sure.
Oh, well, you know, this, you know, and that's not what NASA looks for when they're going to send folks up. They want folks who are going to be like, well, that sucked, but let me look at this little piece of it and solve this. Let me look at this piece and solve this. And that's what, you know, Watney did over and over and over again. The part where he loses all his crops and almost dies, and it's just, you know, this brutal destruction of the Hab.
Right.
That was, you know, they did show him fatigued and tired and broken, but he got back to the piece by piece solving of the individual problems. Yeah. That, for me, is the real message to this movie.
That is
and
the
why
thing.
I want to show why I want to show this to people who are having difficulties with resiliency. Yeah. This is what we talk about in therapy when people are doing cognitive behavioral therapy about, you know, overwhelming anxiety or overwhelming worry, is break it down into bite-sized pieces.
Yeah.
Jeff, how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And folks, that's the movie of The Martian, eating an elephant, one bite at a time.
Yeah, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. You know, there's all that. I actually think about the movie Frozen 2 a lot, which I thought Frozen 2 was better than Frozen 1. But there's a song that Anna sings towards the end. You know, she thinks that her sister has just died. Olaf has melted right in front of her, which is awful if you think about it. Just watching your friend dissolve. And she sings a song called "Do the Next Right Thing."
Yes.
And it's so powerful. And I think about that all the time of, like, when you're lost and you're even morally crushed, just do the next right thing. You know what the right thing to do is, so just do the next right thing. And it is that power of incremental progress that is the theme of the movie. It's the thing to take away is when you're overwhelmed, just do the next thing. And it made for a very, very powerful film.
Yeah, I like to think of it this way, Jeff. Theoretically, hypothetically, if you are going to dig a bunch of post holes in your mountain yard, you need to remove one rock at a time. Just hypothetically. Not as if that's something that I struggled with this weekend. I'm just saying, one rock at a time.
This is just an interesting film thing, Josh, so I just want to highlight it very quickly. Because it was part of the book, but it is just sort of something interesting that's happened in the entertainment industry. China has gotten very involved in Hollywood. And I was part of adapting a screenplay a while ago, and the producer came to me and said, I have some money possibly from China. I want to take this movie to China, possibly have a Chinese actor, et cetera, et cetera. The interesting thing about the money that comes from China, though, is that China cannot be portrayed in a negative light, or you won't get the money. And so even though it was part of the book, I thought it was interesting that, like, in this movie, when the ship wrecks, China comes in and is our savior. And it really promotes China in a good light. And I get it. If you're given the money, you want to be portrayed in a good light. The difference between kind of the money that comes from China, the money doesn't come from the United States when we fund a movie. It comes from individual investors. And so there isn't the desire to show the goodness of your government, but when the money's coming from the government. But Apple is another one where they won't give you a license to use their phones if you're a villain. So the villain in any movie is never on an iPhone. And that is specific to Apple's, we'll give you money, we will let you, use our image, but it can't be a villain. And so I just think that that's kind of fascinating. And it's why when you're watching a movie and you're like, oh, wow, China's really, really great here. Money came from China, and they are making sure that they're portrayed in a good light. There's nothing wrong with that. I just think it's interesting. I just think it's an interesting part of Hollywood, and it's very unique to China. There are no other sort of instances or countries where they have to be portrayed in a good light in order to get the money.
Yeah, you bring up a really interesting point, and one of the things that has always kind of stood out to me in our obvious Hollywood bad guy versus good guy is in the two Top Gun movies. Can you name for me the enemy country that we went to battle with?
No, there's very specifically not one.
Right.
That was a point of the filmmakers. Yeah.
Right. And that has always kind of bugged me. I mean, the original Top Gun, it was during the Cold War, so you
would have been easy to make it Russia.
Would have been easy to make it Russia. In fact, I think they call them MiGs, which are Russian-made jets, but they never say that it's the Soviet Union.
Right.
And then in this one, it's not named. It's not China. It's not Russia. It's not Iran.
It's not North Korea.
In this one, I mean, Top Gun Maverick.
Top Gun Maverick. Yeah.
So I that always struck me as odd.
Yeah, but I also didn't have any issue with it because you do kind of have to think about it in order to realize, like, oh yeah, who is the villain? It's kind of like Edward Norton's character in Fight Club doesn't have a name. Nobody ever calls him by his name. He's just the narrator. Okay, Josh, I did see Project Hail Mary this weekend, and as sort of the screenwriting lesson of the episode, I wanted to talk about the differences between the two movies. These are both Andy Weir adaptations. They were both exceptional. But I walked out of Hail Mary and had this feeling of, wow, that was a really great movie. And it was a really beautiful movie that I will never watch again.
Oh.
And I didn't have that feeling after The Martian. After The Martian, I wanted to watch it again immediately.
Yeah, me too.
And that to me was interesting, and I had to think about it for a second. But this is what I realized. And you don't have to have seen Hail Mary to get this point. The difference between the two is that every scene and every shot in The Martian pushed the story forward.
Okay.
And there were a lot of shots in Hail Mary that were beautiful and were there to highlight sort of the visual, beauty and grace and all the things that they could do visually, but they didn't push the story forward. And the movie was 2.5 hours long. And there were just a lot of scenes that you could cut because they didn't do anything to push the story forward. And it's not enough for, I think, viewers to sit there and just watch something beautiful. We're there to see a story. We're there to experience a story. And so I think if that movie had been like 45 minutes, shorter, it would be a movie that I would want to watch again. But there was a lot of really beautiful fluff in Hail Mary. And I think that the best storytellers will still give you really beautiful shots and really well-composed shots, but everything is always pushing the story forward. And in every Ridley Scott movie I've ever seen, the plot is always moving. Every scene always moves you forward. And that, I think, is a really important, important lesson.
Jeff, is a good test of this for the average viewer is a good test of this to decide if this is a really tightly made movie is to look at a scene and say, could this movie survive without this scene?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because you'll actually the director's cut often of Ridley Scott's movies are a lot longer, and there are a lot of scenes that got cut from Gladiator that I wish had been back in there because they explain, the relationship between Maximus and Maximus's essentially slave owner. I can't remember his name, but there were a lot more scenes, between them that gave some more context. But the final cut that they, show in theaters for most Ridley Scott movies are very tight. They're very tight. And Ridley has final cut. He has final say over what gets released, and it's still often, not everything that he shot. Because, I think Ridley Scott, of all people, is an old school filmmaker who knows keep moving the story forward. And that might be a generational thing. People might disagree and be like, oh, I'm going to watch Hail Mary over and over and over again because it was so beautiful. But, to me, it was just a little bit too long and therefore didn't land, I think, the way that, that I wanted it to. Yeah.
So I'm assuming in the final cut of The Martian that got released from Ridley Scott, I'm assuming he must have left all the exomorph scenes on the editing floor.
Correct. Mark Watney versus the Exomorphs. Very different movie, very short. Very short.
Very, very short. Yeah, not a lot of places to hide in the ducts in the hab.
Josh, one of the main characters in this is obviously Jessica Chastain. She's the leader of the mission, and she ultimately decides to go back for Mark Watney and disobey a direct order in doing so. But while she's on the planet, she has to make the really tough decision to leave him behind during the storm and prioritize, everybody else's life and realize they are all going to be screwed if she goes for him. That has got to just emotionally crush somebody. But we all kind of know it's the right thing to do. But being the person who has to make that decision has got to be incredibly, incredibly hard.
Yeah, it is really difficult to make the command decision to prioritize the rest of your team or the mission over an individual person or a few people. Now, full disclosure, I've never been in this situation to have to make this kind of life or death decision.
Right.
But it is well known. It has happened, and people train for it.
Right.
NASA has training for this. They don't have a formal leave someone behind manual. The variables are just too complex. Okay. But they do use simulation-based ethics to train for this. And they have something called death sims. And this is astronauts participate in workshops where they sit in a circle and workshop the death or abandonment of a crew member.
Oh, wow.
They discuss the logistics, such things as, do we bring the body back? Do we jettison it? If someone is alive but the oxygen is at 1%, who gets the mask? Things like this. So they talk about this cognitive readiness. And you and I've talked about this over and over again. How do you deal with something that is going to evoke the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response? You train for it over and
Before
over.
I go into any negotiation, when I was an agent, I worked out in my head every possible thing that they could say. I tried to brainstorm every possible thing that they could throw at me so that I wasn't flustered during the negotiation. I think you do that at every level. It's smart to go through that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so NASA helps commanders prioritize making a recognitional decision, intuitive, rather than a panicked one, which is what she did in this situation.
Yeah.
We have a lot of information about how to do this from the military, which puts commanders in a lot of situational triage scenarios.
Right.
And they also do a lot of training about this. They have vignettes. They're put through tactical decision games and given a scenario, such as your squad's taking fire. One man is pinned under a vehicle. If you stay 30 more seconds to lift it, an RPG will hit the transport truck carrying 10 other men. What do you do?
Right.
So they play through this over and over and over again. And then they're also trained in something called the OODA loop, or OODA. And this is observe, orient, decide, and act. And they're trained to do this faster than their emotions can catch up.
Oh,
so
interesting.
The goal is to make the hard choice immediately, as hesitation often results in losing everyone instead of just one.
Right.
Now, none of this helps prevent the moral injury after the fact of the psychological damage of having to make a decision that is the right one,
Right.
but may break a moral code that you have to do to leave somebody behind to save others. And you saw Jessica Chastain's character struggle with that throughout the rest of the movie.
Yeah. Do you go back, Josh?
Yes, because it's the one I can live with. It's the one I can sleep with at night.
Even if that's breaking your training?
Well, yeah, because you have time to think about it and you have time to plot about it. We're talking about these split-second decisions. That wasn't a split-second decision. That was something that they could think about, plot about.
Yeah.
And again, going back to what we talked about, and talk about in another part of this episode, if they had the psychological safety of talk this through with NASA as opposed to have to make this in a vacuum because the trust has been ruptured by Jeff Daniels / Bridges,
right.
Then they probably would have been able to make that decision in an open space with NASA as opposed to a closed space.
Yeah, I think I go back too because he's my buddy, and the only thing that I'm risking is my own life and some gear. I think that they were able to give NASA all the stuff that they collected on the mission. So it's like, I've got a really fancy car and I can go save my friend. Of course I'm going to go save my friend. I don't care that you don't get your car back. Of course I'm going to go save my friend. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that decision, even though they did betray, Jeff Bridges Daniels' trust. I think that's the right decision. Here's something though that I just want to briefly mention, and this makes me very, very sad every time I think about it. There's a friend of mine who told me the story about her husband. Her husband did a solo sail across the Pacific and left from LA and was trying to make it to Japan and got lost at sea. And the sheer amount of resources that they used to try and find this guy was incredible. They diverted ships. The ships had helicopters on them. The helicopters were, doing these massive circles. At some point, they even diverted a satellite, a military satellite, to try and find this guy. Probably millions of dollars were spent trying to find this guy who, sailed out to sea and got lost. And it just bothers me that I think that that's the right thing to do, and yet we have people sleeping on the street and dying because it's cold. We just have the resources, and we even have the resilience to save people. Why don't we save everyone? And why is Mark Watney's life, which I think is everybody would agree with, everybody watching this movie is like, yeah, go get him. Why is that life more valuable than someone who's just having a really hard time? And I just think that that's one of the great blights on our society is that we let people die, when we let people suffer, when we don't have to. Okay, so I thought Project Hail Mary was a great adaptation. I thought that The Martian was a great adaptation. But Josh, there's a lot of science fiction movies out there that did not get a good adaptation. And so
that is true.
So this week's top 5 list that nobody asked for is my personal top 5 list of science fiction movies that need another adaptation, that weren't very good, and they didn't do the book justice, so we need to try again and give the book a better adaptation than what it got.
Okay.
And that's our top 5 list of the week.
All right, Jeff, I'm going to bet you want to just jump right into this. So give me your number 5.
So number 5 is going to be I, Robot by Isaac Asimov. Isaac Asimov is one of, if not the most prolific science fiction writer of all time. His stories are amazing. There's no need to dramatically change them, which is what I, Robot did. This one basically used the title and nothing else. The book is about logic puzzles, ethics, and the slow realization that the robots might be more human than us. And the movie goes full action thriller. A proper adaptation would feel more like a series of tense, cerebral cases. And I think that would be interesting. I think that there's an audience for that. So I, Robot is my number 5.
Jeff, that is a great call, especially now when they, iRobot is one of the books that Asimov talks about the basic laws of robotics.
Yeah.
And right now with AI starting to power robots, we need this at the forefront of our minds more than ever.
I agree.
All right, Jeff, number 4.
Number 4 is Ready Player One. Visually, sure, it's awesome. But the book is more about obsession, isolation, and the cost of living inside of nostalgia. The movie turns it into a fast-moving adventure and sort of skips over the harder stuff. It needed more bite and less sugar. This is a book that I read, Josh, when I picked it up. I read it in one sitting. I did not put it down. I started in the morning and I finished at night. I could not put this book down, and I loved it. And so I was a little disappointed when I saw the film.
You know, it's funny, Jeff. I too read this book in one day in one sitting. It was that good.
Yeah.
I didn't think the movie was bad at all. I thought it was an okay adaptation. I would have liked to have really seen a graphical representation of him going through the Zork level, which they didn't do.
Right.
And it was also kind of hindered by, some of the licensing agreements that they had to get in the movie or couldn't put in the movie. It also, co-starred Ben Mendelsohn, who's one of my favorite actors, and so I don't know. I thought this was a fine adaptation. I don't think you need to do it dirty like this.
Yeah, I think it's all based for me on one scene, where in the book the first clue is really basic, and it's in a place where everybody can access, and it's like in a cave. And in the movie, it's in this race. And so they have this big set piece that's a race. And the main character finds it by going backwards. Anybody who's ever played a racing game knows that if you go backwards, you will find something secret. You will find a secret path. So the very first race, someone would have gone backwards. And so that just drove me absolutely nuts, that it's like, you didn't do the job of like consulting gamers on this, because that was just an absolutely dumb plot point. And so maybe my entire dislike of that movie stems from that one plot point, but it remains.
Note to self: go backwards in a racing game. Okay, Jeff, number 3.
All right, number 3 is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. Man, I love this book, and the movie just missed. The biggest miss here was the psychology. The book is about, again, isolation, manipulation, and the slow shaping of a child into a weapon. The movie rushes through that and never really lets you feel what Ender is going through. It needed more time, and it needed more nerve. This was a violent book. The military strategy was so good when he's in school, and they just missed, I think, on every level with that movie, besides having Harrison Ford.
But Jeff, Ben Kingsley had a face tattoo. I don't understand why you didn't love it.
So number 2, Josh, is John Carter of Mars. I think everybody can agree with this, including Taylor Kitsch. I'm sure he'd like this one back. This one's wild because it basically inspired everything, this book. Star Wars, Avatar, all of it. But the movie felt weirdly generic, like it forgot that it was the OG. And the marketing didn't help either. The world is huge, colorful, and strange, and it just needs someone to really lean into that. Honestly, Miller and Lord would be great for a John Carter adaptation.
Sure.
They crushed Hail Mary. I would love to see them do John Carter of Mars.
Sure. Okay, Jeff, and your number 1 movie from a book that deserves a readaptation.
Yeah, so most of these were sci-fi, and I meant for the list to be mainly sci-fi. But number 1 for me is The Dark Tower. I mean, this was Stephen King's opus. This should have been a franchise on the level of Lord of the Rings. Instead, we got a rushed, confused hour-and-a-half movie that tried to cram an entire mythos into one story. The tone, the world building, the philosophy, it all just got flattened. This needs a long-form, prestige treatment, and it didn't get that, and it was an absolute shame. I don't know what they were thinking by making it just this short movie. People love Stephen King. We love Stephen King movies. Make this 3, 4, 5 films long. There's the content for it. There was the desire for it. That one made absolutely no sense, and nobody would even blink if you remade it. We would all just say, yep, first movie didn't happen, let's go.
There was the Idris Elba and the Matthew McConaughey of it all that was just wasted.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And McConaughey I thought was great. And Idris was great. Like they had the ingredients, and they just straight up blew it. So yeah, Josh, that's my top 5. Anybody you want to add? Anybody you want to take issue with again? Because you certainly took issue as we went. So is there anything you want to add here?
No, I can't come up with one. It's a good list.
That is
I'll tell you another book, Jeff, that I think probably has been adapted into a movie, although I can't remember it, but should be adapted into a sprawling sci-fi epic is
Dune.
Stranger in a Strange Land.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's like the Jones family Bible. All right, Josh, I think that's a pretty good coverage of The Martian. Thanks, as always, for watching or listening to Cinemental and our coverage of The Martian. Cinemental is produced by me, Jeff Jones, and edited by David Haverty. If you like this episode, please subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also watch clips of Cinemental on YouTube, where we would love to hear what you would like us to cover next. You can also watch my companion series, The One Thing, where I take a deeper dive into screenwriting, both available on the Large and in Charge channel on YouTube. You can follow Dr. Josh Jones on Threads or by searching for him in your Netscape browser. This has been a Large and in Charge production. For Josh Jones, I am Jeff Jones, and we will see you next week.
I want you to hit me as hard as you can.